The Great One's Journey by the Liar Who Lies Chapter 10, Noisy Tempest. Jack could hear his own heart beating quickly. The sight of gigantic flying venomous needles wasn't something he could bat an eye off of. The first few that came to him swiftly met their ends with loud squelches. He kept his mouth shut, swallowing the contents that were about to exit from his throat. He tried to listen to the movements, tried to enter the state to no avail. The sound of buzzing and whooshing were just too loud for him. He could only see what was ahead of him. Jack felt very vulnerable at the moment. "Look out!" The boy heard a slash behind him. Turning around, he saw the elven man cut off a wasp that almost pierced him. "We've got to stick together, it's the only way to prevent them from hitting our blind spots." Finding his reason sound, Jack quickly complied. While it was a struggle at first, after a few accidental hits between their weapons they were able to read each other's movement clearly. Jack found it similar to the flow state, but this time it wasn't just him in it. The elf signaled him and he quickly understood. They went near the crossbow user and protected her while she reloaded. "I've a useful spell against them, protect me while I chant it." The three quickly went over and protected all the spellcaster's sides as she chanted her spell. Mountain roar. The wind blew harshly against the swarm, pushing them all further back. "We have around 30 seconds, what's the plan?" The elf suddenly asked. "Can you take us to your shadow?" Jack could only enter the shadows for a bit more than 15 seconds maximum each time, and that was reduced by 5 seconds for each person he carried with. Only for a few seconds, he replied hastily, "Can you make that 5? He thought about it before answering, "I think so." The elf nodded and said, "Good." He then spoke in elven tongue, "Poe, light up your bombs." In the past, he questioned why a scout would ever use a bomb to his sister. His sister said it was so she could always be ready for any situation. He laughed her off back then. He would gladly eat his own words now. "Got it," she nodded and lit them up. Erden turned to the boy and ordered, "When I give the signal, you pull us in." He nodded. Now, Erden grabbed both girls and Jack grabbed onto Erden, pulling them into the shadows. Boom! The wasps that finally just returned to the battlefield were blown to smithereens. After a few more seconds, the 4 came out. They coughed from the smoke, while Jack was on his knees. It appeared that forcing himself to hide longer than the intended time took a great toll on his body. He didn't feel like he could go in again right now. The elf crouched and asked, "Are you good?" He wanted to shake his head, but if he quit now then the rest wouldn't be able to fight them off for long. There wouldn't be enough melee attackers to deter the wasps then. Jack stood up, very fatigued, and went back to his stance. The elves looked concerned, but prepared again, nonetheless. The smoke cleared. On the sky, thousands more wasps descended. It appeared the explosion stirred some more into action. The group continued fighting them off for a few more minutes until the wooden sword fell out of the boy's hand. Jack knew this was it. He couldn't fight any longer. No, he still had his arms. He remembered his teacher throwing her weapon at him before she went back to the battlefield. If she could do it without a sword, then so could he. He could still fight, damn it. He pulled his fist and punched towards a wasp. Only for its stinger to point at his fist. He closed his eyes, clenched his teeth, and waited for it to pierce. That was very foolish. He opened his eyes to see a hand grabbing the wasp, whose stinger was mere inches from his fist. "But I suppose it's my fault for not teaching you unarmed combat." The hand clenched, and the bug went splat. He looked to the owner of the hand. The elves had already moved back, extremely wary of the newcomer who came out of nowhere. "Teacher." Jack sighed in relief. He fell unceremoniously to the floor. He knew he was completely safe now. Rimuru flicked the insect off his hand along with its insides. Rimuru figured normal swordsmanship would be of no help in protecting his student, so he opted another way. "It seems I've to pay a little attention this time," he said as he wielded his bakken and went into an unsheathing position. Compound martial arts. Jack struggled to open his eyes to witness what was about to come, while the elves looked over at the stranger with uncertainty. Tempest. He saw his teacher bounce forward with incredible speed. He couldn't keep an eye on the movements, but heard much less buzzing in just 1 second. It was then he was able to hear again. He closed his eyes, for he didn't need them to see. He heard every attack. It was beautiful. It was music to his ears. Like a lullaby. the tempestuous melody lulled him to sleep. Compound martial arts, Tempest, was Rimuru's martial magnum opus. It derived from all the martial arts he had seen, and involved every one of them into a chaotic symphony of attacks. It took Rimuru more than an entire eon to finish. What was shown just now was not even a billionth of what it was actually capable of. He did it within average human limits. Granted, any other person would have had their limbs ripped off after attempting this. "The Tempest shall approach," repeated Erden. He was slack-jawed. The swordswoman took down the rest of the wasps with little to no effort. He turned to look at his teammates who were also stunned still. Rimuru flicked the monster's remains off of his blade. He then looked at his disciple before looking at the three. Erden, not wanting another misunderstanding, quickly exclaimed, "He fought hard with this to dwindle down the numbers. But, as you can see, it wasn't very successful." He waited with bated breath. They all knew that if they incited the woman's ire, then they would be annihilated. After a few seconds of total silence, the woman nodded. Erden heard his teammate gasp once again. He looked towards her, only for her to point at the blue-haired woman and saw near her particles of light forming into a figure. The light turned into a translucent blonde man with tan skin. If he were to look closely, he could see similarities with him and the woman. It looked like the translucent man wore a pitiful face, and talked as if he were pleading to her. "Do you hear what he's saying?" asked the elf. It was then when he heard it. He'd heard their eldest speak it when he was little. He couldn't understand it, but he knew that the words spoken right now were extremely similar to the ones back then. The ancient tongue. It was a language used in the Age of Chaos. An age that barely anybody knew about. All that they knew was that it was the age when gods, angels, heroes, and demon lords used to roam the world. But it was real. How else would they be able to explain the sealed monster sea? He'd heard the woman speak with the ancient tongue. He realized now what the spirits wanted. It was for this conversation to happen. It was what they considered as something important. The three had finally completed their mission. After a while, the translucent man suddenly separated back into particles, which were bound back immediately to form someone else. This person was a woman with her hair having all the shades of a rainbow. She wore a crown and had mystical wings on her back. Tth, cough. He turned to see Ledwin coughing and stuttering. He moved over and worriedly asked, "What's wrong?" Tth, the Spirit Queen. Both elven siblings froze. That was the Spirit Queen. What was she doing talking with a human? Why did she come in the first place? It was at this moment Erden knew that this was going to be bigger than he'd ever imagined. He needed to quickly inform the elders about this. He looked at the other two, and it looked like they were thinking the same thing. And so, they waited from afar for the conversation to end. Oh, I know. Let's watch Shrey." Rimuru was cut off before he could even finish. "Your student is in danger." Ciel's voice felt much more deadpan than usual. "Huh? Wait, don't change the subject." "Why not Shrek?" shouted the demon lord demandingly. "I never denied anything," denied the sentient AI vehemently. "That's because you didn't even let me finish," the slime complained. Once again, she denied, "I have no idea what you're talking about." He retorted while jumping to his feet, "Bullshit. You knew exactly what I was talking about." "Your student is in danger," repeated the Manas. This time her tone was a faint bit more challenging. "Tisk. You win this time," Rimuru relented before he teleported to his student. Chapter 11. Guilty. 4 trails the spirits greeted as they spun around Rimuru. "We greet the Great One." Before he could reply, they began their magic projection. They quickly merged with each other to the translucent form of a man he would recognize anywhere. Hey bro," his big brother greeted him sheepishly. He asked confusedly, "Veldora? What's going on?" The mighty storm dragon scratched his head and said, "Hey, listen. Can I stay at your place for a little bit? I'm traveling right now. If you're cool with that, then you're welcome to join," Rimuru offered. Rimuru couldn't help but think something was suspicious here. Veldora's expression lit up as he accepted. "Yeah, that's great, we'll travel just like OL." The spirits suddenly shifted. Wah! Someone's overriding the communication. They reformed and once again he was greeted with a familiar sight. "Rimuru. Sorry to be a bother, but my husband is currently in no position for a break." Ramirez the Spirit Queen was quick to get to the point. He knew something smelled fishy with Veldora. The demon sighed and asked, "What did he do this time?" Rimuru could see the displeasure on her face as she explained, "My husband has accidentally dropped 10 of the most chaotic souls in the multiverse into the reincarnation cycle." Rimuru pinched his nose. Chaotic souls were a term used for the souls of creatures that caused great disorder in their lifetimes. They weren't necessarily evil, just that their actions caused great amounts of unneeded change to happen in his multiverse. He then questioned, were they at least cleansed of their memories before he let them go? That's the thing. While thankfully he didn't forget about that, the soul's intents were still stapled with them. So, they will likely cause more chaos after their reincarnation, she explained. Rimuru nodded and inquired, I see. So, I assume you've already sent your squads to track them down? Ramirez shook her head and proclaimed, my husband made this mess, so he will finish it. It might take him quite a while to find them. Before that, he won't be able to hang with you. She then added, oh, I managed to cast a spell in time for 4 of them. It will pull their souls to you, so they will spawn in the planet you're currently on. Do take care of that when you find them. Veldora won't be able to go there until he's finished with the other 6. Rimuru flashed a knowing smile. Ramirez caught this and rolled her eyes. You're making that face again. And no, I'm being serious about his punishment this time. Ramirez had a soft spot for Veldora. Any punishment she gave him was usually pulled back when they made up with each other. Really, now? When did that blockhead become so good at wooing? Fine, she relented, I'll talk to him when he catches his first 2 or 3. We'll see how it goes out then. You're so kind, Ramirez, praised Rimuru. You brothers always get on my nerves. Always getting each other in and out of trouble, she complained as she shook her head. Rimuru chuckled and asked, need I remind you that you were like that too when you were young? Please, don't even go there. I'm going to go now, she pleaded as she turned away. The spirits finally dispersed. The 3 watched as the hologram disappeared before walking over to him. Erden bowed, and the rest followed. He started as he rose again, we thank you for coming to our aid and saving our lives. My name is Erden. These 2 beside me are Podin and Ledwin. We do not have much on us, but we would Lee. No, I'm not interested with your rewards, waved the woman off. The elf was surprised. From all his interactions with humans before, they seemed to always ask for more. He then nodded and asked, if it's all right with you, then we would like to go on our way now. If I may I ask for your names? While picking up the boy, the woman answered, my name is Rimuru. This one is my student, Jack. She then continued with a question, do you know where the nearest settlement is? Erden blinked in surprise before answering, why, yes, it's right over. The blonde elf man explained to Rimuru where it was before they went on their separate ways. Well, then, he looked down the boy he was carrying, let's get us a place to stay. As the sun set, 4 bright lights could be seen trailing down the night sky. The people who saw it pointed at it, curious of what it entailed. They split off to opposite directions, disappearing beyond their vision. After the light show, everyone seemed to go back about their night. Jack woke up to the sound of humming. No, it wasn't the type of humming a person would make. He was still hearing the sound his teacher's attack made in his head. He didn't know which he should be amazed about, the art itself or the fact he was able to listen to all of it. He knew if he were to try to emulate it right now, he would undoubtedly die. The technique was just that dangerous. He shook his head and opened his eyes. He saw that he was in an unfamiliar wooden room, on a blanket-covered straw bed. He saw the candle on the nightstand and a table with a chair on the side of the room. He looked towards the window to see it was dark outside. He heard the sound of the door open and tensed, but as he saw who opened it he relaxed. Teacher, Jack greeted. She greeted back and asked, hey, how are you feeling? Tired, was his only explanation. She nodded and walked in. The boy noticed in her hands 2 bowls of stew. She offered one to him and he took it. She pulled the chair and moved it towards his bed. He then realized something and asked, what happened to the elves? They went back to where they came from. Though, they did tell me to thank you for your help and introduce themselves to you, explained his teacher. He nodded as he listened to their names. They then ate in a comfortable silence. We'll stay here for a few days. A week if we have to. We'll leave once you get better, she said as she pat his head. Thank you, teacher, he replied, for everything. His teacher smiled and said, "It's a teacher's job to take care of their students. No matter if they're sick or if they're in danger." Jack felt his smile widening. He put aside his bowl, turned to his teacher, but then stopped. He wasn't sure if he should do this. His teacher seemed to have realized what he wanted to do and smiled kindly before setting down her own bowl. She then wrapped her arms around him and pulled him into a hug, her chin on the top of his head. Jack closed his eyes and hugged back. Was this what it felt like? When he was younger, he used to see the kids he played with run into their parents' arms and hug each other tightly. He always wanted to know what it felt like. And now that he did, he could understand very well where they were coming from. His teacher rubbed his back with her hand and said, "You did very well today. I'm very proud of you." He felt his eyes water and hid within her chest. His teacher chuckled, but said nothing. After several minutes, they separated. She then ordered, "Go to sleep. It's getting late." He nodded and did just that. His teacher sat by his side as he fell asleep. His lips unconsciously formed a smile.